Hello, everyone. In this video, I will give you information about what is the capital of the United States. You will know more about the capital of the United States after watching our video. If you like our video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you want to watch our other videos, you can visit our channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications to be notified of our new videos. Now, let's watch our video to learn more about the capital of the United States. Brief history of Washington, D.C. It is known that the idea of establishing a national capital city was first put forward in the meeting of the Congress in Philadelphia in June 1783. Washington was established as the capital of the United States after 7 years of negotiations as a federal enclave by members of the U.S. Congress. On July 17, 1790, Congress passed the Residence Act, which created a permanent seat for the federal government. The nation's first president, George Washington 1789-97, named the area at the navigation head of the Potomac River to house ocean-going ships and near the two long-established colonial port cities of Georgetown, now part of the city of Georgetown, Washington, and Alexandria. This location bridged the northern and southern states, but Washington called it the Gate Inward, because it hoped it would serve to economically link the western regions to the East Coast Tidewater and Piedmont districts, thereby securing the border's allegiance to the new country. The new federal district was named the District of Columbia to honor explorer Christopher Columbus, and the new federal city was named George Washington. Washington is one of the few capital cities that was planned and established as an administrative center. In 1790, French-born American engineer and designer Pierre-Charles L'Enfant was commissioned to plan the new capital. Also, researcher Andrew Ellicott surveyed 100 square miles 260 square kilometers of territory with the help of Benjamin Banneker, a self-taught free black man. The area explored by Ellicott was ceded by Maryland, a slave state, and Virginia, the southern state with the largest slave population, thus contributing to a significant. The main elements of the plan, which was completed in 1791, were the Capitol, the promenade called the Mall, and the Mansion, which was later named the White House. In the plan, it was envisaged that the Capitol and the White House would be located in the center of the city, and that the streets that cut each other at right angles would spread to the four corners of the city, starting from these two buildings. Most of the official buildings in the city are concentrated in the area known as the Federal Triangle, which stretches between the Capitol and the White House. Construction of the Capitol building, the Presidential Palace now the White House, and several other government buildings was nearly complete when Congress moved from Philadelphia to Washington in December 1800. However, there were very few finished housing facilities in Washington at that time. In 1812 the United States declared war on Great Britain, War of 1812, and 2 years later the British occupied the defenseless capital, setting fire to federal buildings. Structural damage was extensive and the local population was in very bad shape. By 1817, however, a newly built White House welcomed President James Monroe. He served in 1817-25, and Congress had the temporary old brick Capitol building built on the site of today's Supreme Court building. It began to assemble in the newly constructed Capitol building in 1819, after spending 5 years in the building. Democratizing societal changes were brought about in the workplace and in society by the change that began in Washington between 1830 and 1865 with President Andrew Jackson. When the railroads arrived in the city in the 1830s, a flood of tourists came with them, changed Washington's social scene forever. Major construction projects for 3 federal buildings, the Treasury Department, the General Post Office, and the Patent Office, the latter now part of the Smithsonian Institution, also began in the 1830s, just a few blocks away in downtown Washington. In the years following the Civil War, the Capitol gradually turned into a showplace. 2 factors contributed to this change. First, self-government was given to Washingtonians for the first time in 1871. Under the new regional government, which lasted only 3 years, numerous city redevelopment projects were undertaken, modern schools and markets were built, streets were paved, exterior lighting installed, sewers constructed and more than 50,000 trees planted. But the cost of these improvements was much higher than Congress had anticipated. The new regional government was short-lived, but Congress had to complete the projects. Second, starting in the 1880s, a number of newcomers from all over the country arrived in Washington. Many were wealthy intellectuals and lobbyists. These new elites made Washington their part-time home during the winter social season. Members of the old Washington community became known as cave inhabitants, a local term for descendants of the area's original families. They usually still stay within their own social circle. Washington's character improved significantly with the completion of the Washington Monument in 1884, the Library of Congress in 1897, and the proliferation of social organizations, private clubs, and formal art societies beginning in the late 1890s. In 1901, the Senate Park Commission, also known as the Macmillan Commission, offered comprehensive and decisive advice to reinvigorate and beautify Washington, arguing that no attempt should be permitted to invade, shatter, or disrupt the symmetry, simplicity, and dignity of the world capital. The new plans were dazzling, but it would all take years for them to materialize. The first half of the 20th century was an explosive time in the capital city socially, economically, and culturally, and Washington began to gain worldwide attention. Woodrow Wilson gave Washington a voice in world affairs through the country's entry into World War I in 1917 and through his work to establish the League of Nations, an organization promoting international cooperation. At the same time, however, rundown buildings were multiplying in Washington's back alleys, and neglected neighborhoods only became worse during the Great Depression years of the 1930s. The New Deal programs of President Franklin D. Roosevelt provided employment to thousands of workers in Washington, not only in existing government offices but also in the construction of new federal buildings, including the Supreme Court and the Federal Triangle buildings. Washington's population surged to about 950,000 during World War II 1939–45. In 1941 a new airport was built, and less than 2 years later the Pentagon was completed, establishing the capital city as the military command center of the country. The neglected beauty of the city was finally recognized, and with the aid of President But Vietnam War protests and race riots occurring in Washington throughout the 1960s deterred people from moving into the city. The construction of a subway system, designed by Harry M. Weiss, beginning in the late 1970s, however, made the city more accessible and awakened a renewed interest in various parts of Washington. Indeed, within 2 centuries, Washington had changed from a small southern town into a major northeastern quarter metropolis that ranked with Boston and Philadelphia. With the advent of the 21st century, a renewed interest in city living brought revitalization and new housing to formerly neglected localities, including downtown Washington, Chinatown, Anacostia, and the former riot quarters, thoroughfares in sections of northwest and northeast D.C. that were razed during the 1968 riots. Washingtonians also began to take pride in the city's many diverse neighborhoods, and tourism beyond the traditional mall area has increased. Indeed, Washington is still considered a city of possibilities, but, at the same time, it exudes the feeling of existing for a definite purpose as the seat of government and is continually developing according to a definite design. L'Enfant's plan, with all its later interpretations, is a shared vision that continues to give guidance and positive direction to the city's development. Where is the Washington, D.C.? Washington, D.C. is a territory and not a state, nor is it part of any U.S. state. It is surrounded by the state of Maryland on the northwest, northeast, and southeast and bordered by the state of Virginia, across the Potomac River, on the west and southwest. The capital city is a state located in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States, west of Idaho, north of Oregon, and south of the Canadian province of Canada on the Pacific Ocean coast. Washington, D.C., D.C. and full District of Columbia, city and capital of the United States of America. It is coextensive with the District of Columbia. The city is often referred to as simply D.C. and is located on the northern shore of the Potomac River at the river's navigation head, that is, the transshipment point between waterway and land transport. The state of Maryland borders the District of Columbia to the north, east, and west, and the state of Virginia borders the district on the southern shore of the Potomac River. After the American Civil War 1861–65, the city of Washington expanded beyond its originally planned boundaries and became legally indistinguishable from the District of Columbia. The Washington metropolitan area covers nearly 4,000 square miles, 10,360 square kilometers, and encompasses 10 counties, 5 in Maryland: Montgomery, Prince George's, Frederick, Charles, and Calvert, and 5 in Virginia: Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, Stafford, and Prince William. Area District: 68 square miles, 176 square kilometers. Pop. 2,570. 2,059 Washington Arlington Alexandria Metro Division, 3,727, 565 Washington Arlington Alexandria Metro Area, 4,796, 183, 2010, 601, 723 Washington Arlington Alexandria Metro Division, 4,377, 088 Washington Arlington Alexandria Metro Area, 5,582,170. Character of the city. Washington is an extraordinary city, one with multiple personalities, a working federal city, an international metropolis, a picturesque tourist destination, an unmatched treasury of the country's history and artifacts, and a cosmopolitan center that retains a neighborly small-town ambience. The role Washington plays as the capital of the United States often overshadows its lively local history and its complex political, economic, and social issues. About half the land in Washington is owned by the U.S. government, which pays no taxes on it. Several 100,000 people in the D.C. metropolitan area work for the federal government. City plan. The city of Washington was built on a gently undulating, low, wide peninsula bounded by the Potomac River and its tributary Anacostia, in the belief that it would become an important trading port. Potomac is an Algonquian word meaning place of commerce, and Anacostia is derived from the name of a local people, the Anacostines, who traded on that river. Surrounding the city are a series of terraces, numbering around 400 in certain areas. Feet 120 meters above sea level, where Washington's neighborhoods are gradually built up. Part of a shallow, long mountain pass now Rock Creek Park separated Washington from the old port city of Georgetown. Development to the north and west of this valley was slow until the end of the 19th century, when the valley was bridged and public transportation was provided. Placing the capital at the center of its street plan, L'Enfant divided the city into 4 sections: northwest largest quadrant, northeast, southeast, and southwest. 3 of the 4 researchers' lines became streets: North Capitol, East Capitol, and South Capitol streets. The 4th dividing line runs west from the Capitol along the middle of the mall to the Potomac River. Washington's streets are arranged in a scheme of wide diagonal streets placed on a grid of broad streets oriented north-south and east-west. The intersections of 2 or 3 diagonal streets are dotted with landscaped circles and squares, while their intersection with grid streets creates triangular and trapezoidal areas and parks, resulting in interesting streetscapes. Streets running in the north-south direction are numbered in the city plan, and the streets extending in the east-west direction are written with letters. There are 2 sets of numbered streets and 2 sets of lettered streets. One series of numbered streets starts from the east of the Capitol and the other from the west. The corresponding 2-letter cluster of streets begins north and south of the Capitol. The name of each street is followed by the abbreviation of the quadrant it is in, for example, 1st Street NW or A Street SC. There are no J, X, Y or Z streets, and the 2 B streets have been renamed Constitution Avenue and Independence Avenue. A number of cross streets are named for U.S. states. Height restrictions for buildings in Washington were enacted by Congress as early as 1899 because of concerns over the fire safety and aesthetics of tall buildings, and the Height of Buildings Act of 1910 assured the city's horizontal landscape. According to the act, no building in Washington may be taller than 130 feet 40 meters, though along certain portions of Pennsylvania Avenue certain structures are allowed to extend an additional 30 feet 9 meters. Thus D.C. lacks the characteristic skyscrapers found in other large U.S. cities. Moreover, as the city has expanded, it has spread out rather than up, with residential and low-rise commercial areas having been replaced by rows of homogeneous box-like office buildings. Climate: Washington has a temperate climate with high humidity levels. Winters are humid and extreme temperatures and heavy snowfalls are not typical. Sparse wet, light snow usually melts quickly because average winter daytime temperatures are in the mid-30s F about 2 C. However, freezing temperatures at night can quickly turn melted snow into ice. In summer, short periods of high temperature, often accompanied by heavy humidity, are common. Average summer daytime temperatures are in the mid-70s F about 24 C, although highs above 100 F about 39 C can occur. Spring and autumn are very pleasantly mild and tend to be longer than summer and winter. Monuments and memorials: much of Washington's appeal can be attributed to the hundreds of outdoor sculptures and monuments that adorn the city's parks, gardens, buildings, streets, and cemeteries. L'Enfant suggested that it would be very nice to use outdoor sculptures as a way to honor the heroes of the new country. Neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. Whether the capital's neighborhoods survived by design or luck, they were all somewhat haphazard and by no means built to L'Enfant's plans. Various factors have influenced the growth and development of Washington's neighborhoods since the second half of the 20th century: the uninterrupted proliferation of federal buildings, the flow of immigrant populations, the expansion of public transport, commuter flights, urban renewal, and in the early period. The 21st century has revived interest in city life. When fair housing laws were passed in the 1950s and 60s, many middle-class European Americans moved to the suburbs, while middle-class African Americans moved to areas that were previously closed to them. Some neighborhoods, notably Capitol Hill and Brookland, have been a habitat created by blacks and whites working together to form integrated communities. Other regions became largely homogeneous strongholds for certain groups, for example, wealthy European Americans in the upper Northwest, wealthy African Americans on the Gold Coast up 16th Street, and poorer African Americans in Anacostia. The district, Northwest, Downtown, Lafayette Square, Foggy Bottom, Georgetown, DuPont Circle, Adams Morgan and beyond, Northeast-Southeast, Capitol Hill, Anacostia, Virginia of Washington, D.C., Maryland. Parks and open spaces. Washington is richly endowed with parks. The largest is Rock Creek Park, encompassing nearly 1,800 acres 730 hectares in northwest D.C. Congress purchased this land in 1890 to safeguard it from development. Remnants of quartzite and soapstone quarries once used by Native Americans can be found there. The National Zoological Park occupies about 160 acres 65 hectares of Rock Creek Park. People of Washington, D.C. Washington has always been an ethnically diverse city. In 1800 a community consisted mostly of wealthy descendants of Europeans, another community consisted of workers who physically built the nation's capital, some educated or skilled, others uneducated or unskilled. Most of these workers were free blacks, slaves and immigrants. Because Washington did not have a large industry, these early immigrants were mostly skilled workers and entrepreneurs from Scotland and Ireland. In the mid to late 19th century, additional immigrants from Germany, Italy, Eastern Europe, Greece, and China established ethnic enclaves within Washington. It had the largest African American urban population in the United States, and a number of prominent black leaders and educators lived there. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, large numbers of rural poor African Americans moved from the South to settle in Washington. In the 1970s, nearly three-quarters of the capital's population were African American. African Americans continued to make up the majority of the D.C. population until the early 2000s, although this proportion declined over the next few decades. At the turn of the 21st century, Washington remains a somewhat racially and economically divided city. While most European Americans live in Northwest D.C., Southeast D.C. consists mainly of a poor African American population. More than half of the city's residents are African American, about 2/5 of European descent, and the rest mostly of Hispanic or Asian descent. In contrast to the city's demographic distribution, European Americans made up about 2/3 of the population and African Americans less than a quarter in the surrounding metropolitan area. The immigrant population in the city and the suburbs includes some of the country's largest Ethiopian, Central American and Korean communities. Economy. As a result of Washington's abundance of federal civil service jobs and its status as a major tourist destination, the city's economy is overwhelmingly dominated by the service sector. Research and development work is another key component of the local economy. Most businesses are linked in some way to the federal government. Thousands of area residents work as lobbyists, seeking favorable legislation for the interests they represent. Although the term lobbyist used in this context probably dates from the early 19th century, it is a popularly held notion that it was coined by General Ulysses S. Grant. The economy is based on national and international political activities, scientific research, and tourism. Manufacturing. Although Washington is not known as a manufacturing center, a number of useful natural resources found in the immediate region are processed and used locally. Finance and other services. Washington has been a banking center since the arrival of Congress and the establishment of a branch office of the Bank of the United States, which survived until 1836. The city's financial district is defined as the area immediately around the Treasury Department, where many private banks are still located. The area has been designated a historic district to preserve the Victorian and Second Empire-style banking houses that were erected there at the turn of the 20th century. Several major government banking institutions are headquartered in Washington, including the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing, under the Department of Treasury, has its main printing facility in Washington. Major international financial institutions in Washington include the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Transportation of Washington, D.C. Washington developed as a river port city at a time when ships were the principal means of transportation. Railroads came to Washington in 1835. Horse-drawn streetcars were first used between Georgetown and the Navy Yard in 1860. By the 1880s, electric streetcar lines had been laid throughout the city and into the outlying new streetcar suburbs of Maryland: Chevy Chase, Garrett Park, Forest Glen, Glen Echo, and Tacoma Park. The streetcars remained in use until 1962, when buses replaced them on the cross-city routes. The main highway in the region is the Capitol Beltway, a 64-mile 103 km interstate roadway encircling Washington and running through Maryland and Virginia. It is one of the country's best-known highways and made famous the phrase "inside the Beltway," which refers, physically, to the city of Washington and its nearest suburbs and, metaphorically, to the political culture of the capital. Public transportation combines a network of buses, both city and regional, with a rail transit system, the Metro, that opened its first stations in 1976. The Metro system is maintained by the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. Metro trains run on more than 100 miles 160 kilometers of track, above and below ground, and connect the nearby suburbs of Maryland and Virginia to Washington. 3 major airports serve Washington: Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport in Arlington, Virginia; Dulles International Airport west of the city in Loudoun County, Virginia. Both Virginia airports were acquired in 1987 by the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. Baltimore Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport is about 30 miles 48 kilometers north of Washington, near Baltimore. Administration and Society Government of Washington, D.C. Washington's governmental structure has slowly evolved into a limited form of self-government under the control of Congress. The city government is unique because Article of the Constitution of the United States of America empowers Congress to exercise exclusive legislative authority over the seat of government. Congress granted Washington its first city government in 1802, providing for a mayor to be appointed by the president and for a 12-member council to be elected by Washington's tax-paying white male residents. In 1871 Congress created a territorial government comprising a governor, an 11-member council appointed by the president, and a popularly elected 22-member House of Delegates. Washington was also allotted a non-voting delegate to the House of Representatives. Georgetown, the city of Washington, and the county of Washington were combined under the new jurisdiction and the territorial government of the District of Columbia. Congress then approved the Organic Act of 1878, which established a permanent form of government in which the District of Columbia was a municipal corporation governed by 3 civilian commissioners, one being from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Not much more changed for nearly 100 years. Prior to 1961, when the 23rd Amendment to the U.S. Constitution allowed the district to choose electors for president and vice president, residents of the District of Columbia had been denied the right to vote in presidential elections. In 1974 President Richard M. Nixon approved limited home rule for the District of Columbia, allowing for the popular election of a mayor and a city council to 4-year terms. Under the resulting system, the council is empowered to set tax rates, formulate the budget, and organize or abolish any agency of the district's government. Congress, however, retains the right to veto any actions by the district government that threaten federal interest, and the budgets that are passed by the council and approved by the mayor have to be reviewed and enacted by Congress. In February 2009 the Senate approved a bill that would give a D.C. representative of the House full voting privileges, but it failed to pass the notion to create D.C. and it is still supported by some residents who object to being taxed by the federal government while lacking proper representation in Congress. The 2 federal and 3 local courts in Washington share legal jurisdiction over district matters until the 1970s, when the courts were reorganized. The Superior Court of the District of Columbia, a single trial court, assumed the functions of the previous 5 courts. Similarly, a single U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia was created, giving Washington an integrated court system. Municipal services: the city's law enforcement is handled by several agencies, each with its own jurisdiction. The Metropolitan Police Department enforces the laws and ordinances of the municipal government. The Capitol Police Force provides security for the Capitol and its grounds, and White House security protects the President and the White House and its grounds. A presidentially appointed Public Service Commission oversees the city's public utilities. The Zoning Commission consists of the mayor, chairman of the city council, architect of the Capitol, and director of the National Park Service. Washington is a city that offers a never-ending wealth of cultural opportunities. Scores of museums, galleries, and theaters are located in the city, many of which are internationally recognized. More money is spent per capita by the local government on the performing arts in D.C. than anywhere else in the United States. Cultural heritage festivals are held throughout the year. More than 750 libraries are located in the Washington area, including the Library of Congress, which contains the largest international collection of research materials in the world. Cultural institutions, museums and galleries. Washington has a plethora of museums, and Smithsonian Museums board of them all alone. These are the National Museum of Natural History 1910, the Freer Gallery of Art 1923, The National Gallery of Art 1941 and 1978 housed in two buildings, the National Museum of American History 1964, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden 1974, the National Air and Space Museum 1976, the National Museum of African Art 1979 moved to the mall location in 1987, the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery 1987, the National Museum of the American Indian 2004, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture 2016. Just off the mall are the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, the Renwick Gallery, and the American Art Museum. Among Washington's other noted private museums and galleries are the Corcoran Gallery of Art, the Dumbarton Oaks Museum, the Krieger Museum, the National Building Museum, the Textile Museum, the Phillips Collection, and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Private home museums include Decatur House, Dumbarton House, Hillwood Museum and Gardens, Octagon House, Tudor Place, and the Woodrow Wilson House. There are several unconventional museums as well, including the International Spy Museum, the Newseum, a museum of news, and the National Museum of Crime Punishment. Theater Washington's first legitimate theater opened in 1800 in Blodgett's Hotel, under the name the United States Theater. Sports and recreation. Baseball is the national pastime, and it has been traditional for the president to initiate the Washington season by throwing out the first pitch since William Howard Taft did so in 1910. The football. Washington Commanders, formerly Washington Redskins of the National Football League NFL, on the other hand, have been a constant presence in the city since 1937. Basketball has an especially rich history in Washington that dates from the first decade of the 20th century, when Edwin Henderson, an African-American physical educator who had learned the game while attending Harvard University, introduced the game to black Washingtonians. Media and Publishing. Washington is a major international information and communications center. In the 1930s, President Franklin Roosevelt began the practice of using the mass media for political purposes with his weekly radio addresses, later known as fireside chats. The Washington Post is the city's major daily newspaper, and its competitor is the Washington Times. The Hill covers Congress, Roll Call reports on Capitol Hill, and Politico covers U.S. and international politics. Thank you for watching the video. If you like the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you want to watch our other videos, you can visit our channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications to be notified of our new videos. See you later.